Hey everyone, I'm Harv, Ian Harvey, founder of Collective Intelligence, and this is Stuff That Matters Now. Okay, welcome back everybody, and I am in Thames today, and I've come across here to talk to Riana Manuel. Hello Riana.
Kia ora, Harv.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. So we've just been chatting about politics beforehand. She said, no, we're not going to talk about politics in the podcast. So that's good. We've done that conversation. Yes. We're moving on. Riana, so thank you for hosting me today. And let's just kick straight off tell me about your place. Tell me about where you're from.
Okay. Well, kia ora whānau. Ko Riana Manuel tōku ingoa, no pare Hauraki ahau. I tipu ake au I roto I tētahi kāinga o Manaia, Te Awanga o Manaia te ingoa. My name's Riana Manuel, and I come from a little village called Manaia. And it's been such a privilege to grow up in a small village, surrounded by pretty much everybody who is related to me. And I believe it's one of the reasons why I've been able to stand in the world confidently, calmly and authentically is because of where I came from. It's the kind of people I've grown up around, people who hold you to account, people who support you and pick you up and lift you up and hold you when you need to be held. So that's the place I've grown up, a little teeny tiny village, literally. One-way bridge going through it, a huge wharekura, a international-sized gymnasium, which is just a crack up when you're driving through Manaia, and a whole bunch of people with amazing hearts, huge work ethic, and a ton of gumption. So that's kind of the place I come from. And I've grown up there, as has my dad. And every other member of my family since the arrival of the waka here in Aotearoa. And they arrived in the sea that's just over there behind the windows. Te kapa moana, so Te Arawa waka and Tainui waka first arrived into those shores. And from there come all of the iwi here in Hauraki.
Do you know what year we're talking when they landed?
No, I actually couldn't tell you the year that they arrived.
Sort of, what do we know? That sort of the.
I mean, all I know, it's hundreds of years ago. Yeah. So, and of course, there's lots of stories that go around it. Why they came into these harbours. The two waka came across from Hawaii together, and then left separately from these areas thereafter. So, Tainui waka accounts for a lot of the tribe or iwi here, but they're not the only waka. Like I said, Te Arawa waka, Mātātua waka. So you'll find different iterations and different iwi. We're very unique in that we have 12 iwi represented here in Hauraki, and 10 of those are what we call mana whenua, and 2 of those are what we call tuku whenua. Mana whenua is that they're of the land, they've been here from the beginning. Tuku whenua is when they've come up and they've helped other tribes out during land wars, and as a result have been gifted land, married into the various tribes, and voila.
And do they have, and they're recognised as a separate iwi? Yeah,
they certainly are. So, for example, my iwi affiliations here in Hauraki are Ngāti Pukenga, ki Manaia, which Ngāti Pukenga are actually an iwi from Tauranga Moana. But during those wars we came up and helped out our brethren of Ngāti Maru, and as a result we're gifted land in the little place of Manaia, which is how we find a space there. But then we married into the iwi of Ngāti Maru, Tamatera, and as a result we all kind of have, if you like, many different iwi affiliations as a result of those marriages. So that's an example of tuku whenua. Ngāti Porou ki Harataunga ki Mataora is another example. So our Ngāti Porou whānau, the story goes that Paikia, the tohora, the whale, as he was going past, stopped at an island called Ahuahu, and that island can be seen just from the shores of Kennedy Bay, or Harataunga as we know it, a traditional name. So that's that connection to Ngāti Porou, and married into Tamatera and so on and so forth. So,
and Riana, tell me what's so special about this place?
Well, I mean, obviously, the most special part is it's my place. I think one of the things that we have in Māoridom is a deep connection to the land and to the places that we come from, and with that connection comes a sense of responsibility to do whatever we have to do, grow our families, grow our whenua, grow our people. These are the kind of connections you have back to a space and a place. I can go anywhere in the world. Well, not so much anymore thanks to COVID, but certainly I can go many, many places, but there's only one place that makes me feel as connected, and that is Manaia. And that's because it's the place, it's what we call our ūkaipō. Ūkaipō, literally translated, u is your mother's milk, kai, obviously, for food, pō is in the night. Because when you're feeding, when you're a child, and you feed, that place that you have to go to in the night, in the very depths of the night, is to your mother, and she will feed you. So that becomes that really special place that you're connected to. So we use it as a descriptor, if you like, of the place you come from or the place you belong to. And usually it's an iwi or a hapu or a whānau connection back to those areas. And that's one of the things I've been mindful since I was a little girl. You grow up in your marae, literally. You grow up swimming and bathing and doing the washing in your awa. To this day, my children still do that during the summer because we generally run out of water. So these are the spaces that literally grow you. And along with the environment is the people. So, I know that in Manaia I can go to any of the households. There are about 8 different families that whakapapa back there. And I'm welcome in any one of those homes. And I know equally that if my children are playing up, that they are going to tell me about that. That if there's a party down the road, they will kick my kids out. It's that kind of a relationship you have to it. So, like I said, I've had the privilege of growing up there. I went away for a little bit of time to do training and things like that, and then came back and started to have my own family. So my dad is how we whakapapa back to Manaia, Harry Mikaere, and he's also been one of the people who have taught me about what service to your community looks like. He's spent his whole life really working for the people. And my mum is of Pākehā origin, so she grew up in a little place called Aotearoa-New Zealand, and her dad was a farmer, came back from the war, and he was from Kākahi prior to that, and her mum was from Palmerston North. And so mum was a teacher, dad was a farmer, she became a nurse in Rotorua. My dad just happened to go to Woodman's College down at Kaingaroa. Naturally had an injury, and they met up at Rotorua Hospital, and about maybe a year later I was born at Sir Edward Guy Wing over in Rotorua.
And do you have brothers and sisters?
I have. So Māori families tend to be very mixed, very mended and blended. So we have, by mum and dad, they gave birth, if you like, to myself. I'm the oldest. I have a younger sister, Jocelyn. Jocelyn is the Chief Operating Officer for Rotorua District Council. And then we have twin brothers who are about 6 years my junior. So Martin is a doctor and works for me here at Te Korowai Hauraki, so he's a GP. And Samuel is the CEO for Waiu Milk. Previously worked for Fonterra and was VP over in Chicago, and has come home just prior to COVID, thank goodness, and has taken up that responsibility to the people down there, which is just in between Whakatane and Kawerau, and is working for Waiu Milk. So, yeah. So
that sense of service comes through very strongly when you describe that. Yeah.
So mum and dad believed in education. They were, they didn't just believe in an education that was your, mainstream education though. They believed heavily in making sure that te reo Māori was a feature of our lives. And of course we grew up on the marae, so that was an important thing to know as well. And even though Dad was the generation that missed the language, he made all efforts by sending us to Māori boarding schools back in the day. So all 4 of us went to that. We had 2 older brothers, whānau brothers, and a younger brother. So I have the privilege of having 2 older brothers who helped to keep me on the straight and narrow, and then a little baby brother who lives up in Auckland. He's an engineer. So, yeah.
And your surname now is Manuel.
Yes. Spanish.
So just give us a history of that, because it's a fascinating aspect I don't think a lot of New Zealanders know about.
So the Manuel family from Manukura whānau from the East Coast. And of course, the name comes from a gentleman who arrived on our shores. Jose was his first name, and Manuel was his second. He took up with 5 different Ngāti Porou women right across the East Coast, and from those 5 women come so many of the East Coast families. They have one of the biggest families in New Zealand, and they have these massive reunions which see all of their legacy come together. And not every year, but every few years they kind of get together, or they go to Spain to have a look at their history there. So often you'll see some of the features of East Coast people is that you will see the odd redhead with green eyes, and that is how Jose was described. He has often been credited with bringing gorse to the East Coast as well, because in some of when his wives passed away, he would plant gorse bushes to protect the burial site from cows and other things. I don't know how true that is, but that's certainly one of the stories that gets banded around, and that's my husband's whānau. He originates from the East Coast, from Hiruharama Marae and Ruatoria, and also from Te Awanga Marae. So I met John when we were, teenagers, and I think, what has it been now, 27 years later, we have had 7 children, and we are now into about 10 grandchildren, so yeah.
So I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask this question.
Sure,
but,
go for it.
Would have you ever lived on the East Coast, or did John need to come to your place?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because we have, so obviously he has a really big family who are desperate to have him back at home, and I am here. So we've done the living apart thing. We did a commuting kind of a relationship a few years back, and he and my youngest daughter. So she went down to the East Coast with him, and we, purchased property, and we decided this was a way we could. I recognised that after 27 years together, that probably we owe some time to the whānau down there. The commuting just isn't what it's cracked up to be, though. I think it's very hard. This is why I think our people traditionally married in-house, because then you were close to your lands, you were close to your people. My mum and dad are still here in Hauraki. I feel a deep sense of wanting to be with them for as long as they have left here. And as you will know by the Māori statistics in this country, Māori don't tend to live a long, long time. So spending that kind of quality time with them is important. But John and I struggle with where are we going to live. And I think I've promised for many years that one day I will move to the East Coast. So my latest compromise is that he's taken up the tumuaki, which is a principal role at Te Kura Kaupapa Māori or Harataunga, which just happens to be on the East Coast. And of course, Ngāti Porou ki Harataunga ki Mataora whānau. So, and it's on the East Coast, so it kind of feels like he's home, which he is, because he whakapapas back to that area. And that will have to do for now, is all I'm going to say, Harv. Yes.
Well done. We got through that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love the smile.
Yeah.
And, Riana, what do you do?
So, what do I do? So my day job, if you like, is I'm the CEO here at Te Korowai Hauora or Hauraki, which is a kaupapa Māori iwi-based health organisation. And I also own a rest home and private hospital. So that keeps me pretty busy. in the hours between, and like I said, and then I live in communities where we tend to be fairly, not, I don't want to say responsible, but there are responsibilities for living in our communities. So we sit on committees and we take care of the marae. We make sure that we cover off cultural practices and events and things like that. So that can be quite a busy job as well. We have a wharekura in Manaia, and I still sit as a board member there as our last child has one more year at kura. And so that's kind of what I do most of the time.
Okay, so let's just bite off the
down.
first. Yep. Let's just look at the first one.
Yeah.
So explain what this entity is, because it takes me a bit to get my head around.
Well, I think, and there's a reason for that, because if we look back to the genesis of Te Korowai, it was originally the response to a lack of mental health services here in Hauraki. And so the people at the time thought, let's develop something that is based on our own kind of world paradigm, if you like, view of the world. And so we started to get this organisation going, and many of the kaumātua who were pivotal in the establishment of it, and that was 26 years ago. And a few years prior to that, when we were doing the kind of, organising an incorporated society and getting enough people around applying for funding and so on and so forth. But, we're in our 27th year now. So Te Korowai was, developed to do that. But then, like all good things, Māori don't tend to chunk off mental health all on its own and just do that. We recognise that, people with mental health or mental wellness issues, that they will also have diabetes and they will have respiratory disease often. And so we started dabbling in the area of primary care, which then saw the development of one GP clinic, and one has become 5 over the years. At the same time, we decided that we needed to be kind of preventative about our method as well. So we wanted to establish services that sought to make people better so that they didn't become unwell. We thought that if you could do community prevention projects and make sure that we had healthy kai sessions and that we made good housing available to people, and that if we did all of these things, it would reduce the likelihood of disease and general unwellness. So we do all of those things, and then of course kaumātua are super important to us in our culture. And as we began to age, because even Māori have improved their ageing process over the years, then we wanted to take care of them. So we started to dabble in home-based support services. So that means we go and do personal cares, we go and do house cleaning, we do medication oversight in people's homes for over 65-year-olds and under 65-year-olds with disabilities and those with ACC requirements. So it just kept evolving, as all good organisations should. And it never, when you go to business school, you always learn about words like pivot and diversification and all that. Well, Te Korowai is like the ultimate example of an organisation or a business that does exactly that. It sees an opportunity and it starts to pivot.
Isn't that, I had this conversation just the other day, that when people who use words like that, like leadership and collaboration and so forth, they go, why do you need to use those words?
Yeah, I know.
Just do it.
I just came from a meeting where I actually used those words.
Oh,
and I
Riana.
even used words like authenticity.
Oh, Riana, that's terrible.
Because, because these are the words that, that kind of fall into the front of your head. But fortunately, we follow it up with things like, but what does that all mean, in reality? So they're icebreakers, if you like, and then we get into then you put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, it's been a privilege. I've been here for 5 years now, and it's been a real privilege to be a leader in this organisation. Mostly, though, we employ nearly 260 people here on the peninsula, which makes us one of the bigger employers. And it also means that as CEO, you take your job seriously. There's nowhere else for my 260 people to go if we were to shut the doors, because there are not the jobs to support that. Like, we're one of the main ways that mortgages get paid and people get
Does that feel heavy sometimes?
I think it would feel heavy if you thought it was all about just you carrying it. I think one of the things that you have to be fairly skilled at, and this is just a personal belief, right, from the book of Riana, is that if you are going to, I prefer to be a CEO that lets other people help manage that load so that it grows their own set of skills, but it also makes them equally feel that sense of responsibility for people. Creating change comes from understanding where you sit inside of it, acknowledging it, taking responsibility for it, and then creating opportunities for people to actually make change. So my job often is just clearing the pathway, if you like, so that people can go about doing the things that they're fantastic at. Talent spotting is important. Have the right people around you at all times. And where you get a sense that people are not the right people, start doing something actively about that as well. And I think everybody who knows me, at least, and knows this organisation, knows that our key priority is to improve Māori health. That's what we're here for. We are unapologetically in this space. So when we talk about prioritising the well-being of Māori, we're not doing it because we want to leave someone else out. We're saying these words because we truly believe that if we as a community and as a country are going to survive all manner of things, including COVID, then those people who are most vulnerable need to be taken care of best. And if we do that, we see absolute growth and development for everybody. It becomes a better space for everybody.
So what are your, and I'm going to use one of those words, KPIs, for knowing that you're actually succeeding? How do you know you're doing a good job?
I think being able to sleep well at night is one of the major KPIs, because when something is not right, I find I cannot sleep. And I'm sure everybody else who's ever been in a leadership position would say the same thing. If you can sleep well at night, generally something is hitting the spot. Knowing, really knowing the temperature of your organisation and your community is super important as well. I have people who I constantly ask, how does it feel there? Like when you walk in the room, how does it feel? And I'm asking that question because often that will indicate to me where things are at, not just from an organisational point of view, but people's day-to-day lives. People coming and asking your advice, asking you for help and support is often another indicator, but not so much the one that I pin everything on. Balance is the other thing. If I find that, that I am now down here every night till 9, 10 o'clock at night, something's not right. Because that means I'm not actually seeing my family. I live an hour and a half away from where I live every day. Or that's how long I travel. So it's a 3-hour trip every day. I have to factor that into my day because I leave home early and I get home really late. So if I leave it too late, then something is going to tip. So I think, those are the things I look for indicators. The minute I sense something is off, then I start doing something about it.
Is that from the book of Riana?
I say that all the time because seriously, you say something and people go, really? She said this? And I'm like, yeah, but I actually referenced it back to
the book of Riana.
That's right.
Are you ever going to publish that book?
Never. Never.
Riana, that's, I've never heard that answer to that question before. But that resonates with me because in a position, it's such a good indicator of, what's going on, how people are feeling.
Yeah.
When I was facilitating, I used to ask people, what are the 3 feelings you want to feel at the end of the meeting?
Yeah.
And they would have to really struggle for that. And they would give me the 3 emotions that they weren't feeling now, right? Because they're not going to give you the emotion that they're feeling now. And it was a really key indicator. And I go, okay, so what do we need to achieve for you to have those 3 emotions? And then you'd also have the interesting situation where people would have to go and Google what an emotion is. Because a lot of
sounds the best.
Well, it was fascinating because they couldn't differentiate between thoughts and emotions, and they'd come up with something. I go, no, that's a thought. I said, emotion. What do you feel? And yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people struggle to actually feel or actually understand what their feelings are.
Yeah, I mean, I just think I don't mind working hard because I think something as I mentioned, I come from a long line of people who have just worked hard all their lives. Working 10 to 12-hour days, stopping at the rest home on the way home and checking on things there, these are not things that worry me. I just think it's good practice. But making sure that everybody gets, enough time, including me, those are important things to do. And sleep for me is an essential thing. And if I'm not getting it, then I know something's off. It's the one true way, because I can be happy and zippy, even on a bad day. And I know how to front up to people and, put my game face on and all the rest of
function.
it. But if I'm not sleeping, then I know something's not right internally.
Yep.
And that forces me into a position to sort of question, well, what's wrong? What's off? What is it? Am I working too long? Am I not doing enough in those spaces? Have I overcommitted myself to something?
So Amanda used to say, Amanda Jane Johnson's
yes.
Amanda introduced me to this concept of listen to your body, right? And I go, what? It was just one of those things. It's like, why do I have to learn this? But, it's so accurate of actually just listening to your body because the body's trying to tell you stuff.
Yeah.
And I went for years just ignoring my body and I try and do it more now, but I'm still got the learner wheels on.
Yeah.
But just going, hang on, what's that? It's and we don't give the body credit for what it's trying to tell us a lot of the time.
No, that's right. So, yeah, trying to be conscious of those things is really, really important. But we can hide ourselves away from a lot of things. I can't hide. If I can't sleep, I can't hide from that. And then I know something's not right.
Right. And then how hard is it to find out what's bugging you?
Not often. Very hard. If someone hasn't already pointed it out, then generally I will, settle into what it is. I think, we talk about authenticity all the time, but it's being authentic with yourself is possibly the hardest thing to do because we talk ourselves into all sorts of rubbish from time to time. Trying to be honest with yourself about what your position is on anything. Now's a perfect time. We're politicking at the moment, so you have to have a position on something. Human beings aren't good at necessarily doing that all the time. We make a decision, but that's different to having a position. So I try to make sure that, anything that I do, that I actually know what my position on it is first. Then I'm going to go and make a decision on it.
Yeah. It's so I've been toying with the thing in the last few weeks, and I was challenged, and I'm writing something up at the moment, and I was challenged by somebody going, what do you stand for, Harv? And I was like, And they said, we know what collective intelligence stands for. What do you stand for? Mm. And so I've been working on that for about 2 or 3 weeks, trying to work out what are not a whole lot of things, but 2 or 3 things. And one of them I've realised is a big deal for me is freedom of thought, right? Yeah. And actually getting people to think. And for me, because this is about me, but I have really become interested in It's a similar thing to what you're talking about. Have I actually thought about this? You know, have I actually put some rigour around this? And am I open-minded to this? Or is it just, I've got this view because it's been a view I've had for a long time?
Yeah.
And in the last few years, I've become a swinging voter. I've never been a swinging voter, right? And I'm really proud of myself being a swinging voter because I go, and I've done this for the last 5 elections, and turn up and go, right, you bastards, who am I going to vote for?
Yeah.
Right? And actually listen to them.
Yeah.
And look at their policies, and you've got these wonderful online things that you can go through, and they've got weighted stuff and whatever, and go, oh, look at that, I align with this party or that party, right? And you go, what's that about? And I think that's really important for me to actually go, I'm going to have my own thoughts, and I am going to not be influenced by the popular whatever it is, and go, and then I'm going to voice them.
Yeah.
And that doesn't always make me very popular. I'm okay with that.
No. But as long as you can, I think at the end of the day, and this goes back to that being able to sleep, you know, ultimately it doesn't matter who you surround yourself with. You have to live with yourself first and foremost. So it's important to understand what your position on something is. Then you make decisions that are right for that position, and trust and have faith in the fact that you know yourself better than anyone else. Ergo, you've made the right decision for you, and you stand by your decision. And I think part of the problem for many people is they're not able to do that, and perhaps that comes from an understanding of themselves. I'm not sure. Like I said before, I've grown up in a village. I can trace my whakapapa all the way back to Hauraki. I know the importance and the value of cultural belief systems. I have lived in this world and raised my children in it for all of my life. And, you know, these are the things that I believe have helped to enable me to stand still, be thoughtful, have a position and make a decision on something. And every day that's what we do here. But the other part of my organisation anyway is to ensure that we listen to the voices of the people who use those services. And that's what Te Korowai has been about from the very inception of the services, is it was about the voice of the people. We're not getting something. We can't find this. We haven't got the help or the support we needed. And sometimes you can go on and on about that, and then sometimes you just make it yourself. And here we sit in a building, one of many buildings that this organisation owns. As I said, I am one of 260 people who are invested, and their whole lives are invested in improving the outcome for our Māori whānau here in Hauraki. And we are a diverse group of people. So we don't just employ Māori. We don't just have Māori people in our services. We have a saying here, mō tātou Hauraki, for all the people of Hauraki. So, you know, we're a diverse melting pot of people who are invested in the well-being and prioritising the needs of Māori. And that's something that I've taken a position on in my life. And therefore I make decisions every day to try and improve that outcome for my people.
We're not going to talk about politics.
And yet you keep mentioning it, huh?
No. Okay, so how am I going to frame this? I mean, Māori health is a big issue in New Zealand.
Yes.
Right, for everybody.
Correct.
What are the key things that you guys really focus on as going, these are the inroads to making a difference?
I think that, you cannot just focus on the disease or the issue for the person. You have to focus on the social determinants that affect that. So there is no point in me getting a person in to see our GPs and then having that person go to the pharmacy with the script that's going to inevitably improve their asthma, and making a referral to a consultant or a outpatient service that is going to help educate them around the use of let's say, their medication, to improve their overall wellness in that disease state. All of that doesn't matter if my person hasn't got a car to get to those appointments, if they haven't got the money to pay for the prescription that they'll leave behind at the pharmacy. So you ask yourself what's happening for them, and you go back to their place, where they live, and you start to see that every wall and every ceiling is covered in black mould. And then you understand why they've had over 10 presentations to your clinic in the last 3 months during a winter. And you walk around casually and you open a cupboard and you find that there's nothing in that cupboard. Those are the things that will have a better outcome. If I can help fix those things, then that's going to primarily improve their wellness out of sight. So I know that if I get them into a warm, clean home, that home is going to improve their wellness overnight, just by virtue of not having black mould in it. I know that if I can guarantee a food supply, because COVID taught us one thing, it was a really valuable lesson. We've been doing food packages for years, but COVID was like nothing else we'd ever seen. Because we weren't just delivering to those people who were high vulnerable, we were delivering to people who had never ever accepted a food package in their lives. And to see their faces as we delivered those packages was soul destroying, because they were getting a glimpse at what people who we've been serving for the last 26 years have felt day in, day out. Nobody wants to receive welfare, but food sovereignty and food protection became a real issue. You saw everybody running to supermarkets. I mean, and this was not the high and vulnerable population running out to buy everything that was on a shelf, because suddenly protection of our food source became a real issue during COVID. So, these are kind of things that our people who are high and vulnerable, living in low socioeconomic circumstances, they suffer that every day. But for Middle New Zealand and their experience during COVID around that was just a real taste test of it. So making sure that you can guarantee a food supply, a good house to live in, and education around a whole raft of things, pastoral support, if you like, to help improve the well-being of families. And yes, often Māori will feature higher in that group of people. And therefore we want to make sure, but there's a whole reason why we find ourselves in this position. This wasn't something that happened overnight. It's not because we're lazy or we're warriors or we're violent or we're aggressive and all of these other tags that get put on us. There's a whole history here in Aotearoa around why Māori people will feature in those statistics that none of us like to look at, whereas I spend the daily looking at them. And I'm totally 100% committed to improving them, no matter which way we cut it. So if our kids, we've got many of our young children that we deal with here in our organisation, a lot of the time we are helping them settle into not having mum and dad at home because they might be in the justice system. And then we help them to deal with mum and dad coming back. And then we make sure that families have got somewhere to land, and and so on and so forth. That's all part of our job. And I think I've heard all the because we're in a political cycle at the moment, and elections coming up. I think we've all heard the promises being made left, right, and centre. I truly wish that, irrespective of which party gets in to government, that this is one of the issues we have to solve in New Zealand. And I think, you hear a lot of people making fun of the kindness epidemic and that we've got this whole thing around welfare and all the rest of it. And I agree, there's self-sufficiency and we want to create mana motuhake, that independence. But at the same time, we have to recognise that some people are going to need a little bit more lifting up before they can get to those spaces. Worth the effort.
The kindness,
Sorry.
No, don't apologise. The kindness epidemic, it just annoys me when I hear that sort of shit. I go. We are seeing
Yes.
more and more wahine coming through in politics. And those, I saw it was interesting on Māori TV I think it was on Sunday. You see the two women from Greens and
Marama Davidson and
Debbie.
Debbie, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
And you saw that intelligent conversation. And then they had the guys with Georgina Bayer there, right? And they were just dicks, just squabbling over each other and talking over each other and so forth. And to see these two women beforehand was just, I thought, polar opposites in their style.
I will say one thing about politics, since you keep on bringing it up, Harv. I have got to say that I have really enjoyed Māori television's debates.
Yep.
In comparison to the leader debates, etc., it's like a totally different atmosphere.
So what's different?
I've enjoyed watching our hosts, or the way, I don't know whether it's a cultural difference or not, but one sort of has a bit of dignity around it, let people have space, we want to acknowledge things like whakawhanaungatanga, so we're interested in knowing, each other's positions, where we've come from, etc. There's I don't know, I can't put my finger on it. All I know is that we lay some rules down, and maybe it's that cultural context. And though there might be, we're not averse to tautohe and having, differing of opinions, but we allow time to listen as well as speak. And some of the leaders' debates and things like that, I think to myself, we could take a leaf out of the book of those.
So I think I can see the difference between the two. And I see on Māori television, they treat the politicians like humans.
Yeah.
On the other, on the mainstream media, they treat them like a object.
Cattle.
And the way they do, and even
poking and prodding. And
even on national radio, I don't like the way some of the questions are bordering on abusive, and they are there to get a reaction and for the presenter to be right. So they're not there in conversation or dialogue, they're there to make a point and get the ratings up. And so I see a vast difference, and I think the debates have been appalling. And you see it in the States at the moment, right? It's the same gig. It's this battle. And I don't think people actually want to see the battle. I think people really want to see intelligent conversations. People talk about politicians as being, lying and this and that. And it's a phenomenally difficult job.
And we're human beings, so which one of us doesn't embellish or get something wrong, make a promise, not deliver? It's the nature of what we do.
Yep. But we think that because they're a politician, then they must be this other thing, and then,
And don't get me wrong, I don't feel sorry for them in any way, shape or form. It was just an observation, but it's been an interesting election cycle.
So coming back to where you live, tell me about your village.
Well, it's just outstandingly beautiful. And it's, we're so lucky because we have a lot of, we have the sea in front of us, we have the rivers in between, we have our mountains in the background, so we're never short of kai. You would say that's part of what makes us fairly self-sufficient. We have our marae, so marae is right in the centre of literally in the centre of our village. We have a kura, which we've been really instrumental in, and when I say we the village, have been instrumental in designing a school that we wanted to see give rise to our young people. We were unhappy with the mainstream schooling systems as they, literally turned the lights off for our children, and we'd seen that happen over decades. So we took a stand and did homeschooling for the first couple of years while we battled with the ministry to get them to recognise a special character and lift. So we only used to go to year 1 to year 8. And then we were able to lift that to year 13 in the end. All of my children have gone to kura there, and we've managed to train our young people up. We now have the second wave. So our students that were the original students in the kura are now the teachers, and that's always, an indication of something that's doing a good thing, growing. So we're a village that's really interested in our people and developing our young people and creating a space for people to stand. And don't get me wrong, we like any village have our issues from time to time, and we have our we have to apply a little bit more care and support to some of our families from time to time, but generally it's a fantastic place to live, and it allows you to live and grow up knowing exactly who you are, where you're from, and what's expected of you.
And that quality of education,
yeah,
Riana, you're happy with?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, I have, as I mentioned, a number of children, 7 children, and
that's more than a number. That's a really big number, but
it's a few. And three of those beautiful children were whānau children as well. So we'd learnt that from my parents. Yep. So my 3 eldest are my 3 nieces by my husband's family, and my husband had a daughter before he met me, and then we have our 3 children together. So yeah. We make a good pack, if you like,
yep.
Or a fever, as we call it, which is, so this area is surrounded by stingrays, and stingrays tend to run in a fever, so they're a group and they get together and they're just really busy and they're really active and they create ripples on the water when they're, flying above, and so we're a bit of a fever.
Right.
And, and that's kind of, I suppose, one of the things I love about being part of a village is that you're never alone. There are days when you wish you were, and but on the whole, you're never alone in your position, and there's always somebody there to help you out. And when you're in these kind of jobs and you are dealing with everybody's, we deal with people's lives on the daily basis, making them better, making them worse, at times, because we don't always know which way it's going to end. We manage risk in terms of, their chronic diseases, mental health, suicide, all of these things. And as I mentioned, we have a rest home and hospital, so we do the end-of-life care as well. It's a lot of responsibility to look after people's welfare from birth through to end of life. And you'll get a lot of complaints along the way, and you'll get a lot of, well done you and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, ultimately what we are striving for is to make sure people have a sense of mana motuhake, that independence, that they can look after themselves. But to do that, they need education and they need that support. And that won't be forever, but it does need to be there. Mm. So... And in the same way, that's what being part of a village, or growing up the way I have anyway, has done for me, is that sometimes I'll need lots of support, and then sometimes I'll need to give that support back to somebody else. So paying it forward becomes a very big part of what you learn.
Yeah, and that's something that's natural for Māori, isn't it?
I believe so, right from the beginning. If you look at the origins, we never, ever went out to destroy people. When we had visitors from different shores, we literally welcomed them. I mean, the treaty is, one of the... Te Tiriti o Waitangi is a document that was designed to do exactly that. Acknowledge that people are here, welcome them, show reciprocity. And then let's have a document that helps us to be better partners and recognises we don't want to lose anything as a part of that deal. Obviously, and then life intervened, so yeah. But we're generally a very welcoming, hospitable bunch, and we know how to look after ourselves. But sometimes that investment has to happen. So before I was talking about the kura and establishing the kura, we recognise that part of our investment in the future is that we raise up really resilient, bright. We already know that they're bright, beautiful and talented. We've just got to make sure that we maintain that. So you asked before, was the quality of education high? Yes, it was, because the quality of education didn't just include a curriculum. It included them, my children have all gone out and done kaitiaki duties. So they go out and they measure the pipi in the sand, in the foreshore and the seabed. They go up into the forest and they do the tagging and they do the possum traps and they do the, you name it. They learn very young, right from the first time you're on the marae, you learn the cycle of life, That's what you do. You know that at a certain age you'll be setting the tables. Then you'll promote yourself up into the kitchen. And then you'll go from there on to the pai, and from the pai you'll then come back through on your final journey in your marae. It really is circle of life stuff, but it teaches you some valuable lessons. And our children, growing up in their kura, have learnt all of that, along with the fact that it's all in te reo Māori. So we brought the language back into our villages, and then we started to say, right, what else do we need? Well, we need teachers to run these kura. So we kept training our young people up into teachers. We trained them to be carvers, because we had no carvers in our village. We've brought back Korowai and Mataora, and we recognised that these are things that were lost over the years, often legislated against, and part of when you start to look at how did we get to somewhere, cause and effect, is looking at the things that were instrumental in that. The legislation was very much a part of that. So when you hear commentary from our politicians these days about, people have to take more responsibility, well, yes, they do. But in order to do that, we have to recognise cause and effect. So why did we become a welfare state? Because there was no more land to live on. Because the things that they primarily had decades before that were gone. So these are important factors that I keep at the top of my mind when I have conversations with people. And sometimes, in some conversations I'll smile nicely at people, and then in other conversations I'll help educate them. And again, that comes down to that discussion around temperature, knowing how to read a room.
Yeah, I still haven't learnt that.
I don't believe that at all.
Look, it's fascinating. I've heard Che Wilson say before that welfare was just the worst thing for Māoridom.
I think it would be the worst thing for anybody, wouldn't it? But it's a slippery slope, and I think the intention is always well-meaning, but it doesn't necessarily address those factors that saw us get to that state. So if you want to change your justice system statistics, then we need to do things like decriminalise marijuana, so that we don't see our people going through a justice system unnecessarily, that actually we start treating them in a health system.
Yep.
And we get them the support. Nobody can get rehab beds these days. What's that about?
Yep.
So we've got this huge drug problem, but there's nowhere to take them and treat them. In actual fact, one of the biggest rehab systems we have here in Aotearoa is the prison system.
Yep.
That's if you can keep the drugs out of the prisons.
Yep.
But generally people come out a little cleaner than when they went in. That just isn't right. So if we can pay for those beds, and they've actually gone in there because they've amassed multiple drug convictions and driving convictions and all the rest of it, and whatever else has sent them down that path, then why wouldn't we invest in it that way? And it's the same conversation about the way that we look after our children. I'm an owner of a rest home and a private hospital. In this country, not only do we give a pension to our over 65-year-olds, but if you have nowhere to be and no one that can look after you, and you need to be in care, there is a thing called a rest home. And if you don't have anything, you're going to qualify for a subsidy. That subsidy is going to make you the beneficiary of a warm place to live, your laundry done, your meals cooked for you. What else have we got? Medical care, transportation to and from, any kind of outpatient visit. It doesn't cover dental care, but it'll certainly get you, it'll get you a grant that'll help you get there. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And then we have children, young people, who cannot get a home to live in, or certainly not a home that is worthy of living in. And so I don't understand the way that we work as a nation. I just think, gosh, we're not very strategic because we can't see the wood for the trees. You know, we just keep doing stuff. And because of the nature of politics, 3-year cycles and all, we just move the chairs around the deck. And that, I think, is a crazy way to run a country or to treat human beings. So my preference is to, take a bigger look at things and say, okay, so if we do that, how would we do this better? How would we support children and their families better? Because people say, what we should do is just, they shouldn't be given money because they're going to go and spend it on all manner of stupid things. Okay. Well then, what would we do about that? Because we spend a lot of money paying for a lot of people in other spaces, but we don't look at that. We look at that like that. We don't look at that like a mother who's collecting a benefit for her and her children. We look at a pensioner as if they deserve it. Some of them are really wealthy.
Interesting, eh? And when you get used to things and stop asking the questions,
yeah,
that's when you have problems.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's lots of oxymorons, I think, in life.
Yeah. So, Riana, we went back to some of the things that that the village is taking on from the past.
Yeah.
And you very recently have got a moko.
Yes, I have. Yeah,
and
my Korowai.
And tell us, and you were the first, and how many generations for that to happen?
So, before me, the last wahine that we can see in our whānau was a wahine called Riana Manuel on my grandmother's side. And so I have a photo of her. And I think we've grown up looking at this photo and thinking, I can't wait till, we need to do that. And the first person to do that was one of my younger cousins. And she got her Korowai, must be about 10 years ago now. And I remember thinking, I've got to do that. So I started talking to my family, to my mum, and I don't know how, but we started to really accelerate the conversation, and we decided that it should be a family thing. So myself, my sister, my daughter, my husband, my son, his wife, we all had our Korowai and mataora done at the same time. And it was a phenomenal experience. And again, it's a little bit like, when you understand where you're from and who you are, and you reclaim some of those spaces, that's what it felt like getting your Korowai. It was like something had been lost for many generations, because this was Korowai and mataora were part of the things that were legislated against. Because the people who performed those were tohunga, and the Tohunga Suppression Act basically cleaned out anything we did with a cultural context, whether it was Korowai, mataora, the way we treated our people for medicine, from rongoa perspective, anything, the karakia, the way that we, blessed our children and the lands and so on and so forth, all of that stuff was undone with those suppression acts.
What sort of year is that?
The Tohunga Suppression Act was well back in I'm not even sure when, but I know that it took years and years into the late 70s to undo it. And New Zealand, right up until I think the late 90s, we still had an act that, meant that should a woman breastfeed in public, we could legally stop that, because that was another piece of legislation that was designed to stop Māori from doing these kind of cultural practices that saw them very united. Well, we didn't just feed our babies, we fed communally. So there's lots of those bits and pieces, and I'm never good with dates, Harv, you'll learn that about me. But certainly if you Google it, you'll find it there.
It sounds like something from the 1860 sort of period.
Well, the Tohunga Suppression Act was one of the first pieces of legislation they brought in, because obviously this was about trying to, undermine a system. And the way you do that is you start to strip away things, language, practices, land.
And look, I've mentioned this before in the podcast series, but I was fortunate enough to do a 2-day which is a short course on New Zealand history, because when I started Collective Intelligence and Māori started joining our whānau, and they started talking about the history, I'm sitting there going, I don't know this shit. What? I don't know this shit, and it was really convenient not to know this shit.
Yeah.
And then going, it was run by a fabulous guy 2 days, and I just sat there and going, oh my God, I just had no idea how systemic it was to depower the iwi and systematically, so that because they couldn't get hold of the land.
Yeah, it's a process,
Yeah.
Very clever, you'd have to say, but, it has some really outrageous effects, and one of those effects is the welfare system.
Yeah, and the look at just the sheer harm that colonisation, and look, it happened all around the world, but, it was, and the irony was this historian that was running the course talked about how open-minded the English were when they got to New Zealand, because it was the last place, and so they weren't actually they were trying to do the right thing, but then fell back into the old ways very, very quickly.
I love it when people say, we weren't as colonised, or we got the good version of colonisation, and actually I don't know that there is ever any kind of version that's good about that. Every version I've ever looked at just results in the same thing, which is, loss of land equals, progressive outcomes for other people. And I think, the good thing is, Harv, is that you and I can sit here and we can have this conversation about colonisation. It doesn't have to be something that burns and tears us apart. It actually has to be something that unites us. The conversation around colonisation is recognising what's been done here. When you recognise what's been done, then you start to put things right, and you start to work in a way that, the whole point of the treaty was to create a partnership. Not to see one person better than the other, but to protect those kind of things that even back then they knew all those years ago, they knew that to hold those things, to hold those taonga, as they called it, language, the land, our people knew then, to hold those things was to hold a sense of self, was to hold your mana motuhake. They wanted to protect that, and they could see even then how by letting our whānau in from Nō Care, as we like to say, or from out of area, that could very quickly diminish those rights if we weren't careful. And, so you can kind of see the logic that sat in behind the whole thing, and then the goodwill that was intended. To that's the partnership conversation. So we don't mind. This is when people hear those conversations. I wish they would just stop and listen, like you said before, around how you do your swing voting. The best thing you can do, and for many of our New Zealand people, they have no idea of the history of this country because we don't teach it. Why don't we teach it? I learnt more in history about the Tsardom than I did about New Zealand history. Why is that? Well, what's wrong with us as a country that we're not grown up enough?
Well, it's a bit inconvenient, really.
Well, I get it. It's uncomfortable. But, so is childbirth. Yet we go through that every single day. Yeah. We front up to that and we be uncomfortable for a few hours.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not.
And that might explain a few things, doesn't it, Harv?
Absolutely. Look, I'm really excited about New Zealand history being taught in schools.
So am I. It's our history.
And I'm looking forward to some of the reactions back at home. It's going to be fascinating as kids come back, especially in the teenage years, coming back and start talking to their parents about New Zealand history and so forth, and see the conversations that go on inside the houses.
I'm just excited to know that their generations will be those who lead out real discussions about this. Yeah. So, by then that sense of the discomfort, if you like, will be gone from it because it's a natural part of conversation piece. I don't talk about colonisation and get bent out of shape about it. I don't sit there and get angry and all the rest of it because over time, we've been educated and we've learnt about it, whether it came to us via the school system or not. But what I do have is a deep sense of how it affected people in this country and why we have to do things differently, better.
And Riana, I, as a Pākehā, I'm really excited from experience that the more I embrace Māori culture, the more I understand it, the more I can access it, the better my life is.
Yeah, for sure.
And I had a conversation this morning with one of our, we had a board meeting this morning, and one of the board members rang me afterwards, and she's a young Māori woman from Hamilton, Tainui, and wanted to get my view on why don't we have Māori facilitators, because we don't, right?
Yeah.
They're all white, and what are we doing about that? And
Good question to have.
Well, the thing is that I enjoyed the. She said, "I hope you don't mind." I said, "No, I absolutely enjoyed the conversation because I have actually reached out and tried to, but then didn't push through." Right? And I said, "No." I said, "I'm cool with that." There's no resistance. She said, "Okay, she's going off to go and do some research and to see where we can act, because she's a coach, right, and is highly qualified." And I said, and I'll get to the point soon, but I said, no. I said that would be fabulous, right? Because I've got no resistance to that at all. In fact, I would embrace it.
Yeah.
Finding the right person, and I wouldn't accept them just because I'm Māori. They need to have all the attributes we're looking for as well. But do you remember in Palmerston North at the host day, and it was the end of a host day, I was a guest, and Dave Craig was the host.
Yes, I remember
and right at the end, out of nowhere, you said, "Can we use the Matariki constellation to frame up the feedback?"
Yeah, that's right. I did too.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And Sue Johnson was facilitating, and she looked at me, I shrugged my shoulders. I was like, I don't know what she's talking about, but let's go.
Yeah.
And that was such a rich, and we all got, can you just explain, so I don't botch it up, what you mean by that?
So often in Māoridom we have what we call Māori models of care, if you like, and we often align those models to, it might be environmental factors, so often it is things like constellations. And Matariki, of course, has a set of stars, 9, and probably more, but 9 that we talk about, and each of those stars are responsible for some part of the environment. And each of those parts of the environment affect the way we think, feel, act, behave. It's very much a calendar-based kind of thing as well. So times for when we know that things will grow well, times for when we know to be rested and calm, and so we call that a maramataka. And what I wanted to do was, when we gave our feedback, was that for each of those whetū or stars, that we could use them to help shape the way we gave feedback. So one of the examples is the hiwa o te rangi, and that particular star is all about aspirations, dreams, and goal setting, if you like. So it's the perfect star, or the perfect thing to form our conversation and our feedback around setting goals for our participant, using those aspirations and things like that to sort of couch it and highlight it. And I like to think that these things are Indigenous models, and they help us as a country to feel a sense of pride in using something that is of our country, it's of our making. That constellation helped to form the navigation series that saw Māori get here in the first instance. So, it's those kind of things. And you see that in the Whare Tapa Whā, which is another Māori model of care that Tā Mason Jury developed, that uses the taha, hinengaro, whānau, wairua, and what did I miss? Hinengaro, whānau, tinana. So, again, using ourselves as a way of kind of developing conversations and pointing a direction, if you like, for people to work in. So we use the concept that a house with its 4 walls, being the whānau, the wairua, tinana, and the hinengaro, if one of those walls is damaged, so you're having trouble at home with your kids, or if you are physically ill, then we know that when the wall is damaged, the house falls. And it's a really good analogy to use with families when they're trying to rediscover or put themselves back together again. So we encourage them to build strong walls for their houses, and that means making sure that your physical health is on point, that your family are well supported and surrounded with the kind of pastoral care they need, that if you get those things right, it generally leads to a better sense of well-being in terms of your mental health. And, of course, then there's the wairua stuff. So we do believe very heavily in our culture that wairua has a big part to play. It's the stuff you can't see. It's the conversations that you have around, when you're feeling off a little bit, and it's got something to do with something that is higher than yourself. So wairua becomes a very big discussion. It's not just a religious experience. It's one of those kind of out-of-body experiences. So these are kind of models that we use, and there's lots of them. And that's what, when I was there that day, I wanted us to use something that, it was the time of Matariki anyway, and I'd been doing a lot of work in that space, but I wanted us to use a model, and maybe it's just because I am Māori and I wanted to, with my team, I wanted to share something that was very Indigenous, that I believe, no matter what your cultural or ethnic background is, these are things that are important for all New Zealanders, understanding these concepts. And then, like you say, so many of us don't know these things. Our last team meeting, we started talking about...
Hang on, just before you get on to... Don't apologise.
Yeah.
I'm just going to... Do you remember the impact that had on the team that day?
Yeah, no, and I was a bit surprised by it, to be fair, because, here I am just rolling it out, saying, oh, yeah, this is it and this is it. And I remember looking around at all the faces and thinking, gosh, I couldn't tell whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. However, in the debrief later at the restaurant, I realised that it had been an eye-opening moment for people, a learning moment, and a good thing.
And it was more than that, I believe, that people felt... so I was given a star. I can't remember the star I was given. It just added so much more to the occasion.
Yeah.
A whole depth that was brought to the table. And it wasn't about Māori or Pākehā, because we could all access it.
That's it.
So you just gave us access to something that we didn't have access to.
Yeah.
It was magical. It was very, very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So then,
yeah.
At your last collective intelligence meeting,
yeah, we started to have some discussions, and it was interesting because one of those discussions, kind of without going into a huge amount of details, because of course, team meetings, what happens at a team meeting stays at a team meeting. But one of the things, the revelations for me, is that I hadn't. So you had this moment with Matariki when I did that set. I didn't realise the impact of that, and I didn't realise that for many people that was the first time they were coming across those conversations. So when we had this next conversation at our last meeting, it was very much the same thing. We were talking about some of the historical things that have happened here in Aotearoa, and I was amazed at how many of my team members had no idea about our history, and I say our collective. So we belong to teams under this title of collective intelligence, but there are many of, it turns out, in my team, who had no idea of this really rich history. And so one of the things we're doing at our next team meeting, it's provoked a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm sure it's going to have we're going to have some really good conversations, but we're going to be doing some work around that at our next team meeting. It's something we decided as a team, not me. I didn't lead it out and say, here, let's do this as a subject, but we decided collectively, as you do, that part of our collective intelligence journey needs to include, some discussion around that history, and opportunity to learn from one another and to confront some of those old issues, to understand that, what happened back then, the profound effect it's had on us as a country now, and most excitingly, how would we affect things going forward? How do we affect change going forward? So, because I don't think it's necessary, this is not it should never be a conversation about, and now I just want you to understand me, because that's not what that's about. It's more like, I think it's time we all understood our country, and I think it's time for us to understand more about each other as human beings, because the one thing we collectively share is that we all breathe oxygen. generally we have two eyes, a nose and a mouth, and we're all human beings, and we all occupy this space together, and we've become one of the leading pieces of real estate in the world for lots of reasons. Distance, our response to COVID, you name it. And we've got a lot to be grateful for and a lot to be happy about being part of this country and belonging to it. But we have a responsibility to it as well. And we have an Indigenous people that cannot be found on any other country in this world. We have a language all of our own, a rich, beautiful language, which, by the way, never ever has profanities and or derogatory words inside of the language. There is one word we use to describe someone who's really annoying us, pukakohua. That's the one word. Every other word is a word of, embodiment, the environment, people, and words that are designed to lift, manaakitanga, to uplift the mana of the person that's with us, whanaungatanga, to acknowledge relationships, kotahitanga, to be one. We actually believe in a communal sense of responsibility to one another. So these are things that, we have here in Aotearoa, and things we should be extremely pleased with. But there's a few things we've got to do before we can dial that up.
Yeah, so it's just not tokenism.
Yeah, that's right. It can never be about that. I'm not interested in tokenism.
Yeah, but it's that's look, I'm really excited about this next stage.
Yeah.
And as I said, my life is a whole lot better having scratched the surface, and I realise it is just scratching the surface. But, the interesting thing is, Riana, here, one of the interesting things is I'm never going to fully understand you.
Yeah.
But I also know my work is to actually understand myself.
That's right.
And why do I react and so forth to these things, and what's that about me? Because I can't change you. I can only change myself.
No.
And getting, it was interesting. I remember people early on in collective intelligence would say, "Oh, I'll talk to Harvey. He's in with the Maoris," right? Go, oh, and I go, "No, I don't want to have that conversation." I said, "This is about you, not about me. I'm not. You need to get interested in this." Mm-hmm. Or maybe I would have liked to have said it possibly more eloquently than that, but it's your stuff to go and look at. But it's it's an interesting, it's an interesting journey once you start learning. And I really struggle with the language, and it frustrates me that I struggle with the language, and that's to do with my hearing and so forth, and the vowels just run away on me and all that sort of carry on. But I don't feel guilty about that, and I've sort of got over that, because initially I'd try. I went to lessons to learn Maori in 1992. It was a disaster. Absolute disaster. But I've always loved listening to the language, even though I couldn't understand the words. And, it is just a stunning language to listen to. Yeah. Riana, before we wrap up, what else would you like to cover? What have we missed?
I don't think we've missed anything, Harv. No, I just, no, we've covered it all. Where I'm from, my family, what I do.
You've got an Olympic-sized stadium there?
International size. Basketball court and netball court. I'm not kidding. It was one of the things, I think, when we came back, my boys played basketball when we came back from the city, and one of the things they had to have was the ability to play basketball. And of course, at our little kura, we had nothing but paddocks. So, like all good parents do, we set about creating some atmosphere, and between our community we managed to convince the ministry to help us build a facility that would enable our children to have access to sports in a very rural, very isolated community. And so we built, and of course my mother is great with applications, funding applications, so she she bedazzled the funders, and before we knew it, we had built this full-size. We only had enough money to do half of it at first, but somehow we all managed to kit together, and voila, we've got this great big court.
Fabulous.
Which is fabulous, so
Yeah.
it makes it...
And Riana, before we sign off, you are a finalist this year. I know you don't want to talk about it, but this is my podcast,
Yes.
and I'll do whatever I want.
Yes, okay, fair enough, huh?
You're a finalist in this Woman of Influence Awards this year in the governance and something else role.
I think it's board and management.
Board and management.
Yeah.
That's on November the 17th. Yeah, don't be late.
I won't be.
I have been to it every year for the last 4 years. I love the event. And this year, because of COVID and whatever, I'm not allowed to go because they're not selling tickets to it. But
I know you're only allowed to take one person with you. That was really hard to announce to my parents that they weren't the one person.
Yeah. So that's normally it's at the Sky City, and it's just a stunning evening in celebration of women, and you get. And it's changed. It's changed a lot because it used to be very corporate, corporate, and then it changed 2 years ago when the overall winner, I can't remember her name, she set up a thing called the Aunties. It's and she is a huge personality.
Yes.
And she got up and said some very naughty words on the stage and apologised to Dame Patsy beforehand, and basically told men to own their shit. And she was, and that it changed after that. She broke the ice.
Nice.
Because before it was very prim and proper.
Yes.
And she just smashed all that, and it's never looked back. It's fabulous. Yeah. So Riana, good luck on that. And I'm sorry you can only take one person, but it is a very cool evening.
Yes.
And I look at who you're in amongst, and it's just go, wow, it's a cool thing just to be nominated for it. And I know you're uncomfortable with it, and I don't care.
Yeah. No, I don't. It's. I know. We have a little whakatauki that says kāore te kumara e kōrero mo tōna reka. So it basically means the kumara should never talk about how sweet it is. So it's always a tough thing when you get nominated for something, and of course you have to accept the nomination. So let's not be blind by it. I accepted the nomination. And I accepted it for a lot of different reasons, but one very, very wise woman, my sister, reminded me that the importance of when these nominations come up and these things, that people do this for you, there's two things to remember. One is to be grateful for the faith that they have in you. So you asked me before, what is the litmus test for me about whether, I'm leading for good change and things like that. And I suppose this nomination is one of those things that a group of people sought to nominate me and then came on pack to come and convince me that I should accept this nomination. The second thing she reminded me of is that this is about legacy. This is about making sure that every young woman out there knows, because, I'm not ancient by anything.
Oh, you're a little bit ancient.
But I'm getting close to those spaces where, where you're a grandmother, but there are a whole generation of young, amazing women coming through, and we need to make sure that we, set a good example for that. And part of that good example is when you're nominated for these things, that you make it known to them that you accept it with pride, and that you accept it on behalf of all the people who've put you in these spaces, so that when it's their turn, that they take the same, they take the same approach, that they know it's a good thing to accept it, and that they feel confident to go out there and be a part of the board and management group or the artistic group or the whatever it is. Being nominated as a woman of influence gives me a great sense of pride. I love being a woman, for starters. I have been blessed, by so many people and things in my life, and I think it's a fabulous thing to, I suppose, give back. And I'm hoping that's how it will be seen, is that this is just me saying thanks, thank you very much, and thanks for the nomination to all the crew that nominated me, and really grateful to be in such a great group of women.
Yeah, it really is.
That's a fine pack of ladies. So
It really is.
I don't hold out much hope there, but it'll be nice to go to the evening.
You know what? The thing is that's the whole point of this thing.
Yeah.
It's a celebration of women, Riana, and it's not about, it's so much more than the winning.
Yeah.
And that's the wonderful thing about women, is that they're not as competitive as men and see it for what it is.
Yeah.
Being nominated, representing, your iwi and all that history and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the other thing, so I had to get over that little bit about making sure that people knew publicly what had happened, because at the end of the day, it's working for organisations like this that have got me there. It's living in villages like Manaia, and these are all they've been part of the journey. So being able to say that out loud so that people understand who this lady is and where these places are is really important too, and it has great spin-off for them.
Yeah. Good luck.
So thank you, Har.
And Riana, keep up the good work.
Thank you.
And I've really enjoyed this. I always enjoyed talking to you, and also thank you for your influence with Collective Intelligence. It means a lot.
Thank you for letting me come and join. I still remember the first interview I had with you. I still remember my first meeting. Oh my goodness! I remember thinking, "Oh my God, what has Shelley Campbell done by putting my name forward for this team?" I remember thinking, this is so strange, these people. But I now get it.
Was it really strange?
It was super strange. I remember my first meeting wondering if I'd make it to my second. Oh. We had a really, I don't know if my first meeting was, because we did, well, anyway, I'm not allowed to talk about those things. But anyway, it was an experience that really made me question it. I now, looking back on that all these years later, I'm so appreciative because Collective Intelligence has been yet another place that I belong to, that I give back to, and that I feel a sense of hope, because I love doing collective work, to meet different people, to be influenced by diverse opinions and thoughts, and to be able to influence people in those spaces. And the really neat part now coming through the teams are the younger ones coming up through those teams and being a part of that journey. So I understand it so much better now. I love the whole concept of, collective intelligence, and it's been a great place. And of course, what can I say? I'm still here.
You're still here. And look, before we sign off, you've also been a big part of teaching us around indigenising processes, and you're, a big part of crafting impact teams, which we're launching at the moment.
Yes.
And having you as part of that advisory board just gives me a lot more confidence that we're actually building something that's actually got some rigour, and is a bigger vessel than just us Pākehā designing it.
Well, it's that whole partnership thing, isn't it?
It is.
Happy to help.
Okay, Riana, good luck on the 17th.
Oh, thanks, Har.
You've just been listening to an episode of Stuff That Matters Now, brought to you by Collective Intelligence. I hope you enjoyed listening to the fun stuff, the rugged stuff, and the complete stuff-ups that have helped this particular Collective Intelligence member evolve while making the world a better place. Do check out our Stuff That Matters Now podcast series on your favourite podcast provider, or visit our website www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz to get links to new episodes. Contact us if you want to learn more about how we can help you evolve yourself and others. Thanks for listening.